Randy, I know we just had Dan Balcauski, founder and chief pricing officer at Product Tranquility, on the podcast a few weeks ago, but I have so many more questions about pricing. Do you think there's a chance we could get him back on?
Well, Lily, let me answer that question with another question. Have you ever heard of Betteridge's Law of Headlines?
No.
It says that any headline in a newspaper that's posed as a question can be answered with the word no. But I think we found Lily's corollary. If there's a question asked in one of our intros, the answer is always yes.
Okay, so you're saying that...
Yep, Dan's back. We go even deeper into the world of pricing strategy this week. Will we need to get him back again someday to answer even more questions from us? Stay tuned. The Product Experience is brought to you by Mind the Product. Every week on the podcast, we talk to the best product people from around the globe.
Visit mindtheproduct.com to catch up on past episodes and discover loads of free resources to help you with your product practice. You can also find more information about Mind the Product's conferences and their great training opportunities happening around the world and online.
Create a free account on the website for a fully personalized experience and to get access to the full library of awesome content and the weekly curated newsletter. Mind the Product also offers free Product Tank meetups in more than 200 cities. There's probably one near you.
Welcome back to the podcast, Dan. It's so great to be here for part 2 of our episode on pricing. How are you doing?
I am doing great. It's so great to be back. I'm very excited for our conversation today, Lily and Randy.
So we had a really good chat in our last episode, which, guys, if you haven't listened to already, you should definitely go and listen to that first. And right at the beginning of the conversation, you teased us with a bit of like a potentially controversial statement about why you hate freemium as a strategy for pricing. So I need to ask, because I didn't ask last time, why do you hate freemium?
Oh, man. Well, I'm expecting the torches and pitchforks to come out as I take on this holy war topic. Maybe nothing could be as controversial as whether you use tabs or spaces in your code. So I think I maybe mentioned this the last time I had done my first real world stint in the world of pricing. I had done an internship about 12 years ago now for a successful Silicon Valley startup. And one of the questions on the CEO's desk was, should they do a freemium strategy? And it was at the time, the high flyers, if you looked at the TechCrunch articles, was all like, Evernote was sort of the darling of the freemium movement. And so I spent a lot of time looking at the companies that were held up as these paragons of success using a freemium approach. And one of the interesting things I discovered as you sort of dug below the headlines of those articles is this really loose definition of success, because what they were able to do was amass pretty significant user bases. But curiously missing was any sort of numbers around the revenue or profitability or growth on those metrics whatsoever. And so, learning over the course of, now over a decade since, and talking to many companies that have tried to do this, what I found is just, it's a really not a good approach. What I'll say overall is that if anyone's mentioning freemium as approach, almost universally, the better answer is to go with a free trial. 14 to 30-day free trial, I'm a big fan of. And freemium, we should be very precise in how we define it, because I think some of the confusion in this space is because people will be like, Facebook is freemium. It's like, no, Facebook is a multi-sided network. You are the user, you're being paid for, monetize your attention, and it's being sold to advertisers who are paying real cash, right? Versus, what a true freemium is we've got a free offer, and then we've got some other premium offer. Also, where this gets confusing is people talk about something like Duolingo, like, Duolingo's freemium. Well, Duolingo's not pure freemium because they have an ad-supported free model. So that's still not what I would call freemium. So when we're talking about freemium, I'm explicitly saying there's a non-monetized free offer, and then there's a premium version of that you upgrade to.
So Slack or Calendly or something like that.
Yeah, I think those are canonical examples of freemium that I think people will bring up. And so I think the problem is that, and I'll come back to Slack and Calendly because they are exceptions, but people use them as if they're the rule. And so let me come back, and if I don't, remind me, because I'll come back to why those are important. So let's quickly just dive in on this idea of free trial versus freemium. Software is what economists would refer to as an experience good. So an experience good, your perception of the product's value changes as you experience it. And so this is not something that's only the domain of software. If you've ever been in a grocery store, pushing your grocery cart around and somebody tries to hand you a sausage on a toothpick as you're doing your Sunday shopping, and you try the sausage, you're like, oh, that's good. Well, okay, oh, what are those? Let me see. Let me go look at them, because you weren't thinking about sausage before. It wasn't on your shopping list, and now you're like, oh, actually, that sparked something in me. Now I want to do more, right? And so, look, consumers have been using this in sample for a while, and no matter how good your marketing or growth teams are, and I'm sure they're amazing, it doesn't matter your website design or copy, white papers you create, the videos you create. There's something that doesn't quite hit that reptilian part of our brain, such that when we see the product with our own experience, with our data in it, that we go, oh, now I get it. Now I understand. And so I think we get that with a free trial. So I'm a big fan of that. But ultimately, freemium, what I learned over the course of research in many years is that, look, best in class freemium, they're going to convert about 1% to 3% of those users into paid customers. So it tends to be one of these things that really you need a massive market for. And so in B2B, that's rarely the case. So it immediately sets you up to not be successful in monetizing those folks. The other thing is it given this, we're talking to mostly product managers, I believe, in your audience. One of the things I've seen is that the people that adopt your free offering over time, they tend to almost be an entirely different customer segment than those that go to your paid offering. But the problem is that in the flow of product feedback that's coming back into the organization, often it's very hard to tell if the feedback is coming from your free users or your paying customers. I've worked with companies before that they've got a support Slack channel that the product managers are on, in case for escalations, and maybe support sending in feature requests, and everyone's trying to be diligent, but oh, hey, user requested this feature, comes through, you don't understand that, oh, it's from our free side, right? And so we're then blending. And I will say the signal versus noise ratio can be overwhelming, because if we think about this 1% to 3% conversion, I was like, well, 99 to 97% of my user base is now this free side, right? Which I've seen this very dramatically, because what can tend to happen is if you go to some of these review sites like a Trustpilot, you may see, 90% of the reviews are from a persona that is using it for a use case that your paying customers aren't using it for. I actually had a client one time that was, they're B2B SaaS software company, but most of their free users were using it for their families, some family use case. And so they're like, oh, this is great for being able to monitor what my kids watch on their computers. You're like, monitor what your kids, and if you imagine you're a legitimate buyer, doing your research on one of these review sites, and you're seeing all this, you're like, what is this software for, right? So all the work your marketing team is doing and positioning, et cetera, is all getting diluted. And I think this giant, 90+% of free users as well, it creates this illusion, this mirage in the growth desert that, look, CMOs, growth teams are doing a very difficult job. It's very hard to acquire customers. And so I think the thing is that it looks very tempting to be like, look, if product would just add this one more feature, if we just change this onboarding flow, if we just, maybe we had this pop-up for the free users that showed them all the amazing stuff they could get if they upgraded, we just do this one thing and we would unlock this conversion. And I just think it drives a lot of inefficiency, unproductive conversations, and it just haven't seen it work. And so I think that we set ourselves up for a significant amount of malinvestment and, unfortunate conversations in the business.
I feel like we could do like a whole episode just on why not to do freemium. But you talked about a few different kind of departments there that were would be involved in conversations around pricing and packaging. In your experience, like, who is typically involved in deciding or like defining what the pricing and the packaging options look like for a business, and what kind of roles are they playing, and who's kind of making that, I guess, that final decision?
Well, so I think, there's obviously different companies are at different stages in their maturity level. So it's hard to say broadly exactly where it is. I think one of the difficulties of me is on my business is I'll have, who the kind of champion stakeholder is who even, reaches out to me for pricing help can be different. It could be the CRO, it could be the CPO, it could be the CMO, it could be the CEO. And so I think there's not sort of a consistent owner. The best data I saw on this, I believe, was OpenView had some info on it. It was about, I think, 60% of B2B SaaS companies, the CEO still own pricing. And then the remaining, let's say 40% was sort of, evenly split depending upon the company by, head of sales, CPO or CMO. So who is sort of leading the charge can vary quite dramatically. But in terms of, so that's sort of the descriptive, like how things are, right? But if we want to talk about the normative, how I think they should be, then ultimately, usually my recommendation is product marketing should own it. So there's a couple of things going on here. So who shouldn't own it? Whoever is responsible for negotiating pricing with customers shouldn't own it, because we really want to protect the strategic element of pricing from the tactical day-to-day concerns. And I think, giving, your head of sales pricing authority is kind of like putting Dracula in charge of the blood bank. It is almost Halloween. So we'll throw a little Halloween reference in there for our listeners. So I just don't think the right incentives align. Ultimately, look, I come from a product background. I'm sure your listeners are a lot of product folks. I believe product management could and has the capability to own it. I just think, as I have done that job and the amount of different things that are on your plate, the ability to do a rigorous job doing that, along with all the other things product leaders are asked to do, just becomes a little much. It's, again, I think they're in the right position in the organization. It's just, given all the other super critical priorities they're asked to do, they definitely should have a seat at the table. But I think product marketing, and look, I look at product marketing and product management as dynamic duo. They're Batman and Robin. I'm not saying one is Batman and one is Robin. They could both be Batman if we want, but I believe them as, they should be partners tied at the hip for the most part, but they're going to own different elements of strategic go-to-market. And so product marketing, they usually will own positioning. And I believe your pricing and packaging is a function of your positioning in the organization. They're usually really tied into messaging, which requires a really deep understanding of your fundamental customer value and value propositions. They really have to know competitive alternatives, because you're usually involved in helping create sales enablement material for sales and go-to-market and other collateral that may exist on the website. And so they also are in a strategic position in the business where they can own that more long-term strategic lever without getting caught into the sort of the tactical day-to-day needs of the business, right? So that being said, pricing is I think, a less mature function overall than product management, because we often talk about product management compared to many other functions in the organization. It's undergone tremendous evolution in the last 20 years. I think pricing is even farther behind it. And so one of the things I recommend is that until we can get pricing to a level of maturity similar to product management, I really think it makes sense to have a pricing committee or pricing council. So what I just said is that doesn't deviate at all, like still having product marketing in charge, but you do want to have the other stakeholders, sales, customer success, CEO, finance, at those product, obviously at the table there in a pricing council. But have someone, like we require, we give authority to product managers to make difficult decisions in order to keep the business moving forward. I think we still need to have, although you have a pricing council, you still have a designated leader who has authority to continue to make decisions, because there's always, pricing, much like product, you're always going to make a decision that makes someone at the table unhappy, right? I mean, I'm going to pick on customer support. Just nothing wrong with customer support people; they work really hard, but they would love if product never shipped a new feature, because their support load will go up every time features and UI changes. But business can't continue to survive and grow that way, so we do make trade-offs. I think pricing is very similar.
Dan, you said earlier that, if the product managers are in the support channels and you're on a freemium thing, then you're just going to be hearing things back from the free customers. Similar, and you need to ignore some of that. Similarly, if you just monitored the reasons that people didn't sign the deals with sales, they're always going to say it's too expensive. So when do you actually go and what are the triggers for reviewing, is our pricing strategy right?
I think that's a great point. So, look, I think we talked about last time some of the different sort of metrics that you might want to be looking at. So, I'm not going to rehash all of those, but I think, one of the kind of rules of thumb is, we should be looking at pricing. If we have win-loss codes in our CRM, for example, we should be looking at those win-loss codes. Generally, we want to be seeing, maybe a third of our deals being lost to pricing. If it's less than that, we're probably priced too low. If it's higher than that, we've got another problem, right? We want to be looking at things like discounting percent. In terms of overall, like, when do you make a change, or when do you, reevaluate pricing? I would say there's no, magic number. Ultimately, pricing is a function of value. And I think especially your relative differentiated value, and your value is always changing. As product leaders, we're constantly focused on how do we, add more value, solve more customer problems. Our competitors, product teams are doing the same thing. We live in very dynamic markets. You've got changes in interest rates, which change, how people value different, the importance people place on different value drivers. So you may see a shift from, how can you help us grow revenue to how can you help us save costs, right? And therefore, you're at that point, if we believe that pricing and value are tied together, it's like, okay, well, now we're shifting the value proposition. And so our pricing may not need to change because our buyer has shifted how they sort of value our product. Right, and so we may want to do things like that. Generally, we put guardrails on it. I think you should be at a minimum evaluating or changing something in your pricing and packaging at a minimum once every 2 years, and probably no more than once a quarter. I think those are good. And then what I see is but making it so it's top of mind in the organization. And that's things like putting together a pricing council, having governance and a process by which conversations about monetization can happen on a regular basis. I've had conversations with CEOs who will talk about, oh yeah, we had a 3-day offsite with our executive team, right? 3 days with the most expensive resources in your company. I'd be like, oh great, what did you guys talk about in terms of pricing and packaging? Well, we didn't talk about pricing and packaging. It's like, really? 3 full days with the most senior people in your organization, and one of the 3 growth levers of your organization you didn't talk about at all? Now, they did. They just didn't talk about it in an explicit way, because I'm sure they talked about things like conversion rates or how do we increase value, right? And so I think is part of what I'm hoping to get is just it becomes much more of an explicit conversation, and that this is a thing that's you do have control over in your business. I'll let you kind of drive whatever you want to from that.
Hey, Lily, you're a senior product leader.
Why, yes, Randy. How kind of you to notice. I may have led just a few product teams in my time.
So you know how important it is to hear stories and get insights from other product leaders facing similar challenges.
Oh my golly gosh. Super important. And to be honest, not so easy to find that these days. So much has changed in the past couple of years.
Oh God, I hear you. Well, the reason I bring it up is because Mind the Product have just released a series of brand new case studies from senior product leaders all about leading product teams through change.
Tell me more.
Well, in this brand new and totally free resource, Mind a Product explore the stories of 5 product leaders who have effectively navigated change in their current and past positions, unveiling crucial lessons and sharing the principles you need to embrace in order to tackle challenges in your role as a product leader. Very
interesting. So who are these product leaders?
Well, they've got some goodies. There's Dave Washa, who is the former CPTO at Zoopla, Kate Leto, who's an amazing product leadership executive coach, and Navya Rahani Gupa, CPO at Peak, for starters. And there's even a bonus tips section on how to look after yourself as a product leader and oodles more further reading suggestions.
This sounds amazing. How do I get my hands on it?
Oh, that's the easy part. Just sign up at mindtheproduct.com, leading through change.
I love your idea of the pricing council. I think that sounds like a great strategy for, I guess, and that pricing council would then drive those conversations and make sure they happen as well, which sounds awesome as well. One of the things that I was kind of curious to sort of dig into a little bit more, and we've talked a little bit about this today, is how different businesses do pricing strategy, whether it's symptomatic of like the business being at the stage that it's at, and just kind of, we talked before as well about the different kind of types of pricing. So like doing your cost-based pricing, your competitor pricing, and then your value-based pricing. Is it symptomatic of like, oh, we just need to like cover our costs, and then we need to like be competitive, and then we need to understand value, and that's the process that every business goes through? Or is it a bit, is there more to it than that? Is there more strategic kind of planning and thought that goes into the pricing strategy for different businesses? In your experience, obviously, I know you don't know what everyone does, but it'd be great to get some of your kind of insight into how that happens in different businesses.
Yeah, so just to clarify the question a little bit. So it's how do people currently, or how do I generally see people approach the pricing and packaging process in their companies?
Yeah, and are they thinking like, okay, we're going to do this now, but in 3 years we're going to have this thing, and at that point we're going to pivot to a different model or a different kind of type of pricing?
I would love to think that it's that strategic. I don't look. I mean, I think the part of the problem is that I see a biased sample of companies because there's a reason that they come to me because they're realizing it's a problem, and they're realizing that they don't know what to do about it. So I don't see the companies that maybe don't even realize the problem and don't know what they're doing about it. Right. I don't see it talked about nearly as much as something like acquisition. So I think I don't know if we talked about this last time, but when I talk about there's 3 ways to grow a SaaS business, there's acquisition, monetization, and retention. And it feels like to me, I don't know if this resonates with you, but almost all the oxygen in the room gets taken up with acquisition. It's like, how do we get more people in the door, grow, acquire new logos, et cetera. And, maybe you see a little bit of that shift into the retention space when you start to see some macroeconomic or recessionary headwinds start to take in. But monetization is, I think, part of it goes to this problem of do you have a governance process? Do you have a monetization process? Do you have an ownership structure at all? And assuming you do, first of all, that's a big assumption. I think some data I've seen is that sort of full-time pricing person, only about 50% of B2B SaaS companies that are IPO stage, which I think is like 100 million in ARR, have a full-time pricing person. And then, it's difficult to tell, it's like, okay, is that in the interim, is that owned, partially by product marketing? Are they doing anything about it at all? So data on this can be a little bit difficult to come by. But I think the part of the decision-making from a strategy perspective, what you're wanting to think about is a couple of different factors as you scale. So how do these things change as companies grow? You've got a change in strategic alternatives. Like, are you primarily focused on short-term, relatively certain profits, or long-term relatively uncertain profits. So, it's very difficult. I think one of the conversations over the last, we've been in a weird zero interest rate phenomenon, monetary regime for the last, since basically 2008. And so there really was this idea of, a dollar in profitability acquired 100 years from now is just as valid as a dollar in profit acquired now. And so I'm going to push all of my decisions out into the future that maximize profitability. And it's only recently have we started to come out of that fever dream. And so I think that's one area where that's really sort of driving this level of conversation. Then I think the other thing is, as you sort of scale, do you have the process, people, and technology? Are you just pricing for one market, or are you pricing internationally, right? These are different areas that can grow over time. So it's difficult to answer, because the problem is, like, there's so many companies at different levels of scale that it's difficult to say like how everyone's doing it, because we just have to talk about every company sort of individually, depending on where they are.
Cool. And I suppose when you're kind of looking at making just those sort of strategic decisions, and you're looking at changing your pricing and packaging, obviously there must be some modeling that needs to happen in order to see, okay, so if we change it like this, then this is the impact that it's going to have on forecasting and that kind of thing. How do you, when you're working with businesses, like, how do you work on modeling the impact of changes to pricing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to be very cautious with a question like this, because there is a contradiction in, let's say, general manager behavior, where they have a tendency to say, well, if I can't get 100% certainty, then I'll just go with my gut. So it's the, like, well, if data can't give me precise answers of exactly what's going to happen, then I'm just going to completely shoot from the hip. And so I feel like there's a logical fallacy embedded there, because actually the larger the uncertainty, the less data you actually need to reduce that uncertainty. So it's really about, how do we measure where the uncertainty is in this exercise, and then actively pursue ways to remove it. So I will say, like, one can never know with absolute certainty how customers will react to a price change. But, there are many ways that we can go towards that problem, and try to avoid getting too nerdy for your audience. I know, two big movies of the summer this year were Barbie and Oppenheimer. So anyone who I didn't see Barbie, but I did go see Oppenheimer. Anyone who went to see Oppenheimer may recall that there was a discussion in there when the Manhattan Project was going on, hey, if we split the atom, there's a non-zero chance we could set the atmosphere on fire. And so you had the smartest physicists in the world trying to figure out, well, crap, like, what do we do, right? So it makes looking like, what's the impact of a pricing change going to be? Look like, this is a baby stakes here. Is like, we're worried about setting the entire atmosphere of the planet on fire with the nuclear explosion. So one of the very intelligent, I believe he won a Nobel Prize in physics, Enrico Fermi, came up with what's called a Fermi decomposition. And so Fermi decomposition is a structured way to look at problems with a lot of unknowns, right? And so we think about any sort of financial or impact modeling. Now, Fermi decomposition, for anyone who's ever gone through consulting interviews, you may have things like, well, how many ping pong balls can fit inside the fuselage of a 747, right? And it's like, well, I don't know, right? And we're like, well, what do I have to know? Okay, well, there'd be some uncertainty around what's the diameter of a ping pong ball? What's the diameter of the fuselage? How long is a 747, right? Like, is it, am I putting balls in the wings or just in the main compartment, right? So this is a generic example of what a Fermi decomposition is, right? And we can do the same thing with any sort of business impact, and then strategically look at what is the different values of the variables and what is our relative uncertainty about those values. So I want to make sure that people understand that Actually, I wrote a post about this last week. Was books I highly recommend. One of them is this book by a guy named Douglas Hubbard. He talks about Fermi decompositions. He wrote a book called How to Measure Anything, Measuring Intangibles in Business, I believe is the subtitle. And one of the things that he talks about is, measurement is not the removal of uncertainty, it's a reduction of uncertainty. And so we want to think through that in terms of like, okay, how do we think of all of the different factors, whether it's, what is this going to do to conversion? What is this going to do to churn? What is this going to do to our new business growth? What are existing customers going to do? And then how do we think about getting additional information to reduce those uncertainties, right? And this is how we need to think about the value of information. Like we're talking about customer value, but there's also a value of information, right? And so depending on the level of this exercise, for example, let me just use a case. Like if you're the CEO of Intel and you're trying to decide, should I spend $10 billion on a new fab for Intel to manufacture chips? Well, it could very easily be worth $10 million to go run some of these very in-depth analytical studies for you to determine whether or not you spend $10 billion. Likewise, if I'm trying to make a decision, I think the net impact of the company is going to be $100K. Like, no way am I going to spend, $1 million or $100,000. Maybe I'll spend $1,000, right? And so we need to always think about what is the relative impact going to be to the business. And I happen to be in a position where, pricing has tremendous upside, which is why people do it. So there's a couple of different other methods. So I think one of the things we talked about last time was indirect research methods like discrete choice modeling, which is a way to get quantitative willingness to pay and preference data from your market. And so one of the things that companies will do based upon the results they get from those studies is they have very sophisticated statistical models in the back end that allow you to run simulations. Some of those techniques may or may not be applicable given the other factors, dimensions of your business, but that is another way people do it. There's plenty of FP&A analysts out there, working on, who former Goldman Sachs investment bankers, right, who can run different scenario analysis models with pro forma inside Excel, et cetera. And there's many other advanced sort of techniques that you can use as well.
So just as a kind of quick follow-up to that, when you are making changes to pricing or pricing and packaging, what do you recommend for the existing customers? Like, how do you recommend changing, either maintaining or changing the situation for existing customers?
Yeah, it's a very important question. And I think the first thing is that it's totally acceptable and recommended to almost treat that as a second project, because it can be so intense and to determine what you're. So I think, right, we want to be able to create the right frame such that we're optimizing for the ideal long-term future. And some of that is going to be like, well, there's going to be like, well, what do we do about our existing customers? And if you have to answer that question first before you figure out what sort of the ideal state is and move towards that, you're going to get stuck in this constant battle of like, well, what, so there is a line of thought out there that I don't agree with that says we should just absolutely 100% grandfather all existing customers on their existing plans. And grandfather just means that we leave them be. That may or may not be practical or appropriate given your business, and there are costs incurred by doing that. So it can complicate your revenue operations systems. It can complicate your renewal conversations, which also complicates your training and education of your internal employees, right? Because they have to like, oh, well, this customer's on this, but I just started last week. What do you mean, like this plan that doesn't exist on our website? And all of a sudden they have to have and you can imagine it like tree rings on a sequoia, right? Over time, like those can really add up and create a lot of complexity in your systems and upgrade paths, et cetera. So there are costs. A couple of tactical pieces of advice. So separate that as a project, right? separate from what do we want our ideal future state to be. Knowing new versus existing customer price changes can be different. And you can, there's no hard and fast rules in this game, right? And so one of the things you can do is that you could move your existing customers over a sequence of price hikes or price changes, right? Where maybe just the new customers, there's a philosophical argument to be had that if we change the pricing for new customers, is that really a price change? Because I don't know about you, but I'm not often price shopping for products I'm not actively buying. I've got other things to do with my time. So nobody really knows who's a new customer, what your old pricing would be, and whatever. They didn't buy them, so they don't get the old pricing. So, we can continue to sort of iterate and update there. And so then one of the things we maybe want to think through is, okay, as we're looking at changing our existing customers, do we want to do it all in one big bang, or does it want to be a sequence of moves? One of those things, one of those other pieces of tactical advice can be when we're looking at changing, again, pricing and packaging. Now, we'll often just talk about pricing, but we mean both. The idea when we are doing any of these significant pricing changes, we're also changing the plans. So even like before we might have had starter and now we have the entry plan, right? It's a different marketing name. It's something else. And, there's a whole bunch of other, reasons internally why we may want to do that as well. But because, hey, we're no longer offering that plan. And then, we want to create structured ways that customers can either stay on their existing plan or maybe migrate, right? And so a lot of this can get into the weeds depending upon the existing customer situation, but know that you have those levers available to you. You have that flexibility to think through. Also, I think the thing is that, I've seen a lot of bad pricing announcements come on recently. And I think one thing is that in our pricing announcements, I'm not a fan of talking about costs. So yes, inflation is big. Salaries have gone up. But I'm not a fan of cost plus pricing for software. And if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Like, customers don't care about your costs. You haven't justified any of your other pricing based upon your costs. If your costs go down, you're setting the expectation that your prices will also go down in the future. And look, some companies absolutely have that. They'll have especially if you're selling physical goods, they may charge, have riders in their contracts based upon some commodity input prices. Those aren't unheard of in more industrial B2B markets. But I don't think that's what most of the people who are listeners of this podcast are in or want to do. And so one of the things that we want to really focus on is the value that we've added and changed, and like, especially if we have usage data. So we're talking to a lot of product managers in this audience. If we know, we're in a world of mass customization. Hey, Lily, I see you've been using feature A, that we just launched 6 months ago. I see you and your team are using it a bunch. From what we could tell, that's probably, helps you guys increase your customer acquisition by X percent or this many dollars of revenue based upon, what we've seen from other customers. And then talking about, hey, look, we really value as a customer. And in order to continue to make investments, we're needing to do a price change. We're needing to do this. And then making it, I think one of the other tactical tips is giving them what you might call like a loyalty discount. Saying, hey, since you've been such a loyal customer, we want you to, we're raising prices for all new customers, but we're extending you at your existing price for 6-12 months, before we move you up. So you've got time, right? We're just letting you know now, right? And then, so focusing on the value, focusing on the investments you want to make, not the costs that you've incurred, and then, highlighting the value that they're receiving from the product.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting having it as a second project. I think that makes total sense.
Dan, we've got time for one last question, and this is going to have to be a short one, I think. But just curious about something that we see over and over again on B2B company sites. They'll give you indicative pricing for a couple of things, and then they ask you to get in touch for a quote. Or maybe they don't give you any pricing at all, and they ask you to get in touch for a quote. What's the logic behind this?
most companies, B2B SaaS companies, do have public pricing and packaging. Data on this is actually a little bit harder to come by than you might expect. The best data I've seen is between 50 and 75% have public pricing and packaging. But there can be, many reasons why. So, for example, I worked with a client once that they were more of a legacy provider that had both hardware and software components, and they had a 55-page price list. And one of the reasons why they were talking to me is because their pricing was so complicated that even their internal salespeople couldn't effectively quote their customers. So yeah, you could publish a 55-page price list on your website, but I don't know that would do you any favors. So that could be a very legitimate reason to have a contact us for a quote. I could talk about, why don't we do this? So one of the things that you'll often see is, even if you do have public pricing and packaging, you'll often see maybe they've got a good, better, best, and then enterprise. And they've got public pricing for the other three, but then enterprise is like contact us for a quote. Why is that the case? Because sometimes it can be for a bunch of different reasons, and it's not just because the enterprise people have we're just going to jerk them around, because the enterprise people may require such additional, for example, services, that the licensing cost that you might quote them on the website becomes a relative minor point of the whole invoice they're going to pay, because they're going to need training and special SLAs, and maybe they need some additional customization and implementation services, and you need to hook them up with a partner. And so, what you're trying to do there is be like, well, I don't want to create a false anchor. Sometimes also you can have different entirely customized offer configurations or pricing metrics for your enterprise clients. And so it can really change depending upon what the needs of the end client are, of like how you're going to configure and price this thing. I will say there are bad reasons to show contact us for a quote. So you're being afraid that your pricing is too high or too low is a bad reason. Our competitors will get easy access to our pricing information. That's a bad reason. Our pricing doesn't represent our actual price because we discount so much. That's a bad reason. So all those reasons signal more significant upstream issues relative to your pricing process, your value proposition definition, your go-to-market strategy, or sales process. But why do customers do it, or why do companies do it? Good reasons. There are good reasons as well.
Not just to be really annoying then.
Yeah.
Dan, thank you so much. This has been really great. We've run out of time again, and I feel like once again we kind of could carry on talking about this for ages. But yeah, no, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate getting the chance to come back and chat with you guys and your audience. Thank you so much for having me.
The Product Experience is the first
and the best
podcast from Mind the Product. Our hosts are me, Lily Smith,
and me, Randy Silver.
Lou Ron Pratt is our producer, and Luke Smith is our editor.
Our theme music is from Hamburg-based band POW, that's P-A-U. Thanks to Arnie Kittler, who curates both Product Tank and MTP Engage in Hamburg, and who also plays bass in the band, for letting us use their music. You can connect with your local product community via Product Tank, regular free meetups in over 200 cities worldwide.
If there's not one near you, maybe you should think about starting one. To find out more, go to mindtheproduct.com/product tank.